In this video, I'm going to show you how to use all these tools to create 8 super easy texture to watercolor. So let's get started with painting. First up is salt, and it's a really popular way of creating texture because it's super easy to do. It's very cheap. All you need is a table salt. So what I'm going to do first is create a nice big wash. So if you check out my salting test where I tested 8 different kinds of salt, you would have found that different salts react differently, and I personally like the table salt best, so be sure to check out that video to see which salt is going to be your favorite to use. I am just sprinkling this salt all over the square, and that's it. That's all we have to do. Just make sure you let this thoroughly dry before you try scraping off the salt. Next up is using watercolor pencils, and I really like using this watercolor pencil. It's the Staedtler Carrot Aquarelle. What I like to do with watercolor pencil is to draw on it first and then either brush on some water or spray on some water to make the line bleed, and I really like that in my artwork. So let's just draw like a leaf, and you can use watercolor pencils in one of 2 ways. You can draw with it on dry paper, or you can draw it on wet paper. If you draw on wet paper, I'll show you in a minute, but you get a much thicker, bolder line. So all I'm going to do is take a big brush, like I'm going to use a 1.5 inch brush, but you can use smaller flat brushes, but you want to be gentle with it. You don't want to drag the brush across too much, because then you're really going to make the line go away and everything just grey or whatever colour you're using the pencil. So I'm just going to wet my brush and then just gently go once and keep going. Now it is going to make a mess. Don't freak out at this stage. And if you want a good effect, make sure you draw a really heavy line to begin with. So that's done. Now, I know it's a bit of a mess, but it's really easy to clean up. All you need is a piece of tissue like this and a clean wet brush with clean water. Just dab it on your tissue a couple of times so that the brush is nice and thirsty. Swipe all that grey away. Or sometimes what I do is I do just go straight in with a tissue and blot out the bits that I want to stay white. And I really like this as a way of outlining a painting, just because it's a really nice effect. It's not quite defined, it's not really sharp, but it's definitely there. And I will just quickly show you what it looks like if you just draw straight onto a wet paper with watercolor pencil. You get a much stronger, which is also really nice. I'm a big fan of it. And then once this is dry, you can come in and put layers of painting over it. Just be careful over the lines, because obviously it's still watercolor pencil. It is going to bleed a bit for you. So the watercolor pencil has dried, and I can just come in and paint this. But you do get a lot more organic look to it, which I really like having in my own art. Next up is using plastic wrap, or we call them cling films in the UK, and it's my favorite way of creating a nice watery texture. So what you need is put lots of different kinds of blue down of your choice. Make sure it's really nice and wet, and you want to put a lot of colour down, because the thing with cling film is that it does have a tendency to lighten up whatever you put down. So if you want a really nice strong look, then make sure you put loads of colour down. And then all you need to do is get a piece of cling film. Can be any cling film. I like to scrunch it up first, and then I am going to use it this way. So I just crinkle it up nicely and then press it down, and that will give it some extra texture. And then all you need to do is let this dry thoroughly and then take it off. Next up is spraying on water, and again what we're going to do is create a nice wash and then kind of let it dry a little bit. So right now you can see it's glistening and there's a lot of water. If you do it now, you can get a reaction. And for example, I will show you a second technique where you can drop some water into the paint and that will create a different texture, but I am going to leave it just a little bit so that it's not puddles of water. So right now I have a nice patch of almost dry, little bit dry and still wet, so I am going to do the spray so you can see how the different wetness reacts. And what you want to do is you want to find a spray that creates big droplets rather than the fine mister one. And you just want to spray a little bit. You don't want too much. But as you can see, it's starting to react already. And we'll see how that dries later on. Next up is a masking fluid, or I think some people call it liquid frisket. And I like to use the PBO drawing gum. Couple of warnings. One is that this does have a strong smell. And I haven't come across a brand that doesn't smell. The other thing is that this thing will wreck your brushes, so do not use your pricey expensive brushes with this ever. What I like to do is either go to Amazon or scare our discount stores and trying to get a set of fine brushes, as in small brushes that are really cheap, and use that instead of using my nicer watercolor brushes. What you're also going to need is a cup of nice soapy water, and this is just a cup of water with a couple drops of dishwashing soap in it. As you use the drawing gum or the liquid frisket or the masking fluid with your brush, it's going to start to dry, and it's going to dry on the brush, and it's going to start building up, and it's just going to splay the brush open. Maybe after 2-3 dips in the drawing gum, I recommend rinsing your brush in the soapy liquid, just like that. Wash it really well, and then you can carry on using it. And you can use it like a normal ink and just start drawing things. And what this will do is protect the paper underneath from getting painted on, and then you'll be able to peel the liquid frisket off later to show white paper again, or whatever color is underneath it. I can even like do little flicks by using the edge of the bottle, and then you must let this thoroughly dry before you put any watercolor on top. If you don't let this dry, it is going to wreck your piece. What's going to happen is your liquid frisket and your watercolor that you put on top is just going to dissolve into each other and make a mess, and it can rip your paper off and everything. So do let this dry completely first. You can usually tell whether the liquid frisket is completely dry or not, because the liquid frisket will change color if it's a tinted one. As it dries, it becomes more translucent, and whereas a wet one is more opaque, so you'll be able to tell by that whether it's dry or not. Next up is just using tissues, and this is a great way of creating textures like clouds. And all you need to do is just make a nice wash. What you need to do is get a piece of tissue while this is still wet. Some people like to twist and then kind of do this kind of thing, and you can get a much stronger effect that isn't perhaps cloud, but it's a really nice texture. Some people just like to dab gently and soften the edges a bit to create nice cloud effects as well. You can also use the edges of the tissue. You can do a lot with just a piece of tissue. Next up is scratching, and this is great for effects like a lot of grass and brushes and stuff. I'm going to show you 2 ways of doing the scratching, and the first one, I am going to come in and scratch the paper while the wash is still wet on the paper. And the other one, I am going to come in once the wash is nice and dry, and I'm just going to scratch the surface of the paint with a sharp knife. So again, we are going to need a nice wash. And then for the first technique, I'm just going to come in while that is wet. This is just a palette knife. It's not sharp at all, but it'll be enough to scratch the surface of the paper. And as you can see, where you break the surface of the watercolor paper, the watercolor will just pool into the area and darken. The wash for the lower half of this square has now dried, so I am just going to grab my knife. You can use this a sharp knife or an X-Acto knife or anything like that. Be careful, obviously, because you are using a sharp tool, but you can start scratching away the surface, and that will give it a different texture. Or again, you can do it like fine like this, or you can really dig in like here and take it straight back to white. And you can experiment between going that way and coming forward. Obviously, this is ripping the paper up, so just be aware that that's what you're going to end up with, and only use it if you're dead sure that you want this technique. Maybe it's light shining on distant water, so it's all glistening and jumpy. Then this technique is super useful to get this kind of look here. Lastly, I'm going to show you how to paint with credit card or any kind of plastic card that you might have that you don't need anymore. You can use this hole, and I'm going to show you that first. So you can just drop some water and then come in with a card, hold it really tight and just scrape it along. A lot of artists use this technique for things like texture of a tree bark, like birch. You can also cut this card into smaller pieces, and then you can do smaller details. You can make a nice big puddle with a color, and then just start scraping for, like, you can make like flowers and things that are really loose and organic. You can come in and do like a sequence of dots and see how that goes. You can have a lot of fun playing with credit cards. You could do like fireworks, and you can get a lot of variations with like the amount of water you put down and the speed at which you scrape. You can do it really fast, or you can do it quite controlled. You can have a whole lot of fun with just a piece of plastic card. We are back. Everything has nicely dried, and I've peeled off most of the things. So let's take a closer look at each of the technique we tried. So the first technique that I showed you was using the salt, and this is how it looks. Really nice feathering happening here, and it's really lovely. If you'd like to learn more about what kind of salt to use and what colors work best and the different kind of textures you can get, I will link a playlist full of experiments with salts up here on the top right for you. The second technique I showed you was the watercolor pencil, and I drew the line with the watercolor pencil and then brushed very lightly with clean brush. This one here was on a wet surface, and I just came in with the watercolor pencil. Two different kinds of intensity, both have this lovely blurred texture onto the line, which I really like. The next technique I showed you was the plastic wrap, and as you can see, it's created this really cool pattern. I think this is a really nice kind of icy texture, and if you arrange the folds of the plastic wrap in more of a linear fashion, then you get a fantastic water seascape happening with your texture. Fourth technique I showed you was the spray on water, and all we did was just create a nice wash, let it dry a little bit, and then came in with a water spray. And as you can see, the paints have reacted really nicely to this one. The next technique was the masking fluid, and I've left this bit covered so that I can show you how to remove masking fluid really easily, and all you need is one of these. If you only have a little bit of masking tape to remove, then you can just rub gently with your fingers, but if you have a lot to remove, it's really tough on your finger and you're going to end up with raw fingers. So I use this thing called the cement picker upper, or a liquid frisket remover. Now if you want to know where to get one of these, I have left a link down in the description down below, as with everything else I used today, so that you can easily go and get one for yourself. This just works like an eraser for your masking fluid, and all you do, you have to be gentle with this because you can rip the paper up. As you can see, there are lots of different color layers happening, and all I did was I painted the whole thing yellow and then came in and put the masking fluid on certain bits, and then I painted the whole thing orange, and then I came in again with the masking fluid, and then I painted the whole thing red, and then came in with a masking tape, and then I painted the whole thing green after that. After that we did the tissue, really good for cloud forming, but also you can get sharper texture as well. For scratching, we did two kinds of scratches. This one was on a wet wash. We just went in with an edge of a palette knife corner. The second one we did was to let the whole wash dry, and then we came back with a sharp knife. And then the last technique we did was with a credit card, and we just moved the paint along with the credit card and use the credit card like a paintbrush. So that was 8 watercolor texture technique that is ideal for beginners in watercolor, or if you are just beginning in your exploration of adding texture to your watercolor. I hope this video has inspired you to do some texturing experiment. Which technique are you dying to try first? Do let me know in the comments down below. If this video was useful and interesting to you, then please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!